This is Groundeffected. My name is Brent, and welcome to dropping your phone in the toilet. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I paint the Lieutenant Space Marine from the start collecting box of the game of Warhammer, which is about little robotic men fighting Martian aliens. And now that I've made every single Warhammer fan completely upset, I think we should probably just get straight into the video. Also, before we do that, make sure to click like if you haven't already, click the subscribe button, and also share the video with your gran, because we know this is the only way we can get one more new subscriber in order for me to have one more new subscriber. If you watched my previous video about painting a Space Marine, then you would have seen that I started out with a volumetric highlight. Basically, I paint a black base coat down, and after that I use a white ink and I come in and paint all the volumes of each part of the model. This includes the head and the backpack. In this case, I painted these parts separately. This specific character has a little bit more detail than the plain intercessor guy that I did in the previous video. So I decided to take these parts and do them separately, because I was not going to deal with trying to paint tiny little pieces stuck to a model. No thank you, I didn't do that. In the last video I used an oil paint, which I made a wash out of that oil paint using a white spirit. This time I'm lazy, so I decided I'm going to try using this panel line wash, accent color, whatever you want to call it, from Tamir, and essentially I just painted this in the exact same way that I used the oil wash in the last video, placing this into all the cracks and crevices and allowing it to flow as much as it will flow is going to give me the depth that I need in the shadows for this color scheme. I make sure to cover every single part, including the backpack and the head. While I was waiting for that panel line wash to dry, I actually decided I was going to come in and paint just the blacks on the gun. Because the gun is like a plasma gun, basically I wanted to keep the white that was left over from the overspray from the previous layers. So I kept that in place just so that I can do an OSL later on. Once I was sure that the panel line was dry, I used white spirit and an earbud to wipe off some of the higher spots. I wanted to make sure that the higher spots were as white as possible for the blue that's going to go over the top, so that that blue would be more saturated and vibrant. One thing I can say, using an earbud like this, it does pick up a lot of little hairs, so if you're going to do that, make sure to go through and pick off all those little hairs before you put the next layer on, otherwise you will lock in a hair and it's going to be a sad time. I then use contrast Telesar blue, and this is no new thing. Essentially I used this in the last video. It's the exact same process that I used from the last video actually, and basically I'm going to spray this over all the highlights, pretty much I would say 70 to 80% of the model. This is going to be my main blue and the color that I'm looking for my specific Ultramarine army. I then use Azul blue, which is an ink from Vallejo, and I'm going to paint that into the shadows and over all the black parts that's left. What this will do is darken the shadows as well as give saturation to the black that's there. The ink will lay on top of the black and make it look slightly tinted by blue, so it won't be black, it will be dark blue. I then used white mixed into a little bit of blue to create my highlights. Yes, a lot of people are gonna say your highlights is too white, bruh. Well, I don't care. I want a white highlight. I want it to be stark, I want it to be bright, I want it to be vibrant. I like a white highlight. If you don't like a white highlight, don't do a white highlight, just do a lighter blue highlight. It's entirely up to you how you paint your models. This is probably one of the things that grown adults should learn when playing with plastic toys. You are allowed to paint them in any way that you feel. And speaking of painting any way you feel, I decided that those little details in the back of his lunchbox bag that he carries on his back needed to be painted. So I painted those parts with the metallic red, and this is going to look sick once I put it onto his back and you can see that color just peeking out from behind his helmet. I also then took black and painted all the little parts on the inside of his armor, or essentially the pieces that are moving by his elbows and his knees. There's these little black bits of the suit. Apparently they're supposed to be black, so I made them black. That's the way it went. In order to create the OSL on the gun, what I did was I painted white first, and I sprayed Hex Wraith Flame, which is a technical paint. I'm not sure what's technical about it, but it is a nice colored paint. And then while that was drying, I dry brushed the silver onto the gun to give it some shape so that you got some nice highlights all over the place. I then sprayed Hexwraith Flame back over the top again, this time to catch some of those edges, and once that had dried, I painted a bit more white just to create a much higher highlight, and I painted Tesseract Glow over the top of that. This gives a super bright, vibrant glow. It looks like some weird friggin' alien plasma is doing its thing inside of his gun, and I guess that's exactly what you want if you have a little spaceman who's trying to kill robots in space, you know? I definitely made a mistake when I painted the shield. Originally, there isn't many pictures of these dudes' shields. Well, there probably is, but it didn't look very well. So I originally thought they were blue, so I had to mask it off and paint it white because it's not blue, it's actually white. Basically what I did was I kind of just airbrushed from the top, leaving a little bit of that blue underneath so that it has a bit of a shade and it's not just a flat white. I also panel lined that and allowed that to dry while I faffed with these ridiculous little friggin' transfers that I got. I thought I'd be clever and get some fancy ones so that when I did my army I'd have fancier friggin' transfers. Maybe it's not the best idea because this transfer was thicker than a toenail that had fungus in it and it just would not stick no matter what I did. I ended up having to paint a clear coat over the top of that just to try and mask some of it a bit. Will not use again, cannot recommend. Perhaps don't do that. Or maybe if you do, test it on something else rather than the lieutenant of your frickin' squad. I then took a bronze color and I base coated all the pieces of metal around his body that are supposed to be gold. In a previous video I mentioned metal and Space Marine in the same sentence, perhaps slightly sarcastically. However, no matter how I said it, this rarely made certain people very mad. Now, I'm not sure if this gold is metal, but it looks like gold, so in my opinion, gold is metal and this part is metal, so suck it bruh, it's a metal golden thing, and I painted it metal color. It'll really blow your mind. I used metallic paints to paint that part too. These lieutenant dudes have a marking on their helmet which helps differentiate them from other characters on the playmat, or board, or court. I don't really know what you want to call this thing that you play these little plastic guys on without hurting anyone's feelings. But basically, in order to tell them apart from each other, some of them have different helmets or paintings on their helmets. And this helps you to know you're not picking up Steve the Grunt, you're picking up Lieutenant friggin' Nigel, who's got all the pack lunches in his backpack. In order to paint that, I painted a white strip down the center and I painted a red over the top of that. Technically there's supposed to be a red stripe with two white stripes next to it, but in order to do that you're going to have to be really steady-handed, and I didn't feel like I was that steady-handed, so I just painted a white stripe with a red down the center. This made it a hell of a lot easier. I carried on with some gold trimming around the model. Basically, at this point, you're kind of at the stage where you just need to catch up with a lot of things. As you're painting, you might get distracted and start working on a different area. Don't worry about that. Just do it. Let it go. Just enjoy the painting. That's the whole point of doing this. If you don't enjoy it, then I'm not really quite sure why you're doing it. So make sure you enjoy the painting. If you're bored of doing gold trim, move on to something else and come back to that gold trim later when you've got a little bit more excitement for gold trim again. For the base of this dude, I'm going to do the same thing in the last video, and I'm going to use another technical paint. This one's got sand in it, and it's called Martian Iron Crust. It dries very, very orange, which is kind of not exactly what I'm looking for, but in order to dull that down a little bit, I'm going to use Resin Flesh Shade, and I'm going to slap this on quite liberally, let's say. I'm going to let it pool up because I want some dark areas and some light areas. We will come back to this later and we will dry brush to get some highlights in it. Speaking of highlights, I'm going to use red leather to highlight this. Yes, this is taking it back to orange, but we want it to be a reddish orange kind of color anyway. Main reason for this is because orange is technically a contrast color to blue. Basically, they might say it's a complementary color, you know, one of these fancy words for color that works better next to another color. Just put blue next to orange and things will stand out. I did a lot of freehanding on this dude. I did a little bit of the shield that's on the front. I'm not really sure why some of the sergeants and lieutenants and captains and whatever you want to call them have these shields. I'll have to look into that. So don't hate me for not knowing about it. I just wanted to paint the dude and I needed to freehand that stuff. So that's what I did. Okay, bruh? Some of the painting for this I did live on stream, and I did this because I wanted to check if my viewers would want to see me on a stream. I did stream on Twitch, so if you are on Twitch, make sure to find me. It's Groundeffected on Twitch, or you could actually just type in twitch.tv/Groundeffected and you will be able to find me. If I go live, you should turn on notifications and it will tell you that I'm going live. Or alternatively, you could join the Patreon and get like a 3-minute heads up if I decide to go live. Anyway, I painted this dude's really cool little private part cover. I'm pretty sure they use this part so that they can help clean their suits. I've been told in the comments that Space Marines clean their suits multiple times a day, and so I think this guy is a master of cleaning suits. This is why he has a massive cloth tied around his waist. This is to help him clean his suits as well as his friends' suits during a very hard day's battle. In order to paint this, I started with a slightly darker kind of color that made absolutely no sense, but it's called Skeleton Bone, and basically it's got a little bit of brown in it. It's not too dark, but it's not too white. I basically paint this down first. I'm going to use Resin Flesh Shade to shade it a little bit. I'm not going to pour it all over the part, just a little bit, and I'm going to use Highlight Skin to highlight areas around that. For the sword, I'm going to use Old Rust from Ammo by Mig, and that's going to be the base coat, and I'm going to use red leather to highlight that. It's as simple as just coming in and trimming those off with a bronze kind of color, and after you've trimmed it off, I use a rich gold to just give it some highlight on the edges of those golden pieces. Once I had done all of these painting things, I decided I needed to add some pigment to it. I added this mostly around his washcloth, around his waist, and make sure to get the back, otherwise people think you forgot, and that's where I called it done. Now I know that this video wasn't probably what my 3D printing fans wanted to see from me. However, just know that I am working on some large statues. They will be coming soon. I just had a little bit of in-between time where I needed to kind of tide things over, still create content, but a lot of stuff has been happening in my personal life. I quit my job at the place that I was previously working at. This caused a little bit of upset for my daily routine, and of course this made things go a little bit haywire, and I was not able to work on the 3D prints that I was supposed to be working on. So in order to cover that space and still create content, I then painted some little miniature space robot men, which I know are not robots. So get in the comments and start to delete that little comment that you were typing about how I have no idea what Warhammer is about, and just leave some other comment there instead. How about that? So I'm currently looking at the moment for a personal space to be able to work out of, make my videos, paint my statues, possibly tattoo, whatever it is that I'm going to be doing. But in the meantime, I'm going to be kind of between things, so stuff may be a little bit up and down. If you see a couple of Space Marines, make sure to like the video anyway, and I will show you some 3D printed stuff in another video. Of course, if you want to see more 3D printed stuff and you want to speak to people about 3D printed stuff, then the best place for you to join is probably the Discord. But you cannot join the Discord unless you've joined the Patreon. Joining the Patreon supports me as a creator and helps me to fund these lights that blind my eyeballs in order for the videos to be made. I find it kinda ironic that as I suggest that the lights are being funded by the Patreon, the one light has to die. And so once again, I am left with just one light. Now don't let your support for this channel die just like my light did. And if you would like to support the channel, then make sure you watch the next video, click the like button, leave some words in the space that YouTube allows you to leave some words in. And if you really want to support further, then the Patreon is there for you. I cannot be mentioning the Patreon without mentioning the latest Patreons we got this week. And by patrons, I mean new Patreon. Damien Storm, thank you my dude so much. It is because of your help that this light blinds my eyeballs, and this light, it will blind it later on once I've told it that you're helping. Now unfortunately I do not enjoy the fact that my scene is not as lit up as I wanted it to be, so I'm just going to give you the end of this video. The end of the video goes something like this. If you didn't like anything you saw in the video, there's nothing I can do for you anymore. The best thing you can do for yourself is to just click the dislike button and then f*** off. If one more light goes flat while I'm recording, I'm actually gonna throw it across the room.